the person leading the session today. Unfortunately, his schedule has filled up quite a bit, and he's in another meeting. So I promised him I would stand in for him, and I hope you're not disappointed with that. So in that sense, after all the food for thought that we've had throughout the last days, consider this the dessert, okay? Before we have the awards ceremony later. And we are going to try to sweeten this for you, with Humberto having the majority of work to be done, with 2 presentations, I believe, right? And the topic today, or this afternoon, is on community and sustainability, in particular escapism, which is a topic that I will be talking about in a few words, and social networks. And I've been told Humberto is a brilliant guy, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what you are presenting later on. And if you don't mind, we'll just stick to the schedule, and I'll just go first. And if somebody would like to take time a little bit and just let me know when I'm done, then I think we have about 15 minutes each, right, with question and answers right after, and that should lead us through this session quite well. So I've already uploaded this here. Let's see if I can get this started properly. Right, I need to get my notes. So you're all familiar with Joe Sirgy, who I'm working with. So this is me, Stephan Grezeskowiak. I'm at a business school in France at the moment. Our school has just merged with another school, and in the scope of this merger we have acquired a new name. So you're probably not familiar with this name, but hopefully in the future, when all our PR work is done. Now, if you know Joe, then you know he's in a marketing department, and so am I. So we're both from the business school angle of things, and we're interested in this topic of well-being or quality of life from the perspective of marketing or consumption. So that's a little bit different than what you've heard about in many sessions before throughout this conference. So we just have to kind of take our marketing hat on today and think a little bit more about consumption rather than more macro issues as in other presentations. Now, knowing about marketing, you know that we deal with a lot of things related to consumption, in particular psychological issues or sociological issues. So we're looking at consumer well-being rather than subjective well-being. We're looking at consumer psychology and consumer sociology as concepts that impact this idea of consumer well-being. So that just to put this into a frame of reference for you to understand better where I'm coming from. Now, the particular component of this equation, the very narrow gap that I'm trying to address with this work that I'm going to present now, has to do with what's called escapism consumption experiences. Now, we generally talk about consumption experiences as that which you experience while consuming. So when you pick up your phone and you make a phone call, you consume a service, and you have a certain service experience, certain consumption experience. Here, we're looking at those experiences that can be characterized as escapism experiences. And those are experiences that refocus, as it says here, your attention, your frame of mind, the way that you're thinking, away from your surroundings. Other people say, well, you're losing yourself in that consumption experience. For example, if you read a book and you get totally immersed in reading this book and the story that you're reading about, you're sort of escaping your surroundings and your environment, and you forget about the things that are going on around you while you read the book. And a new reality comes to life, and this reality closes or finishes when you close the book. All right, so while you're consuming certain things, like, for example, a book, you are escaping. You're escaping reality, the real world around you. Now the question is, how does this type of escape experience impact your well-being? Does it have a positive impact on you? Does it have a negative impact on your subjective well-being? Or does it depend on something? Okay. Now, the perspective that we're taking on this idea of escapism is that we're saying, well, maybe this escapism experience in part is due to a consumer's motivation to get away from something. All right, so I open up that book on purpose. I may not open up the book because I'm interested in the story, but maybe I'm opening up the book because I'm trying to get away from something that I'm dealing with right now. So you're in the hospital and you've just had surgery. You have all the cables around you and whatnot. And this stresses you. Maybe you open up the book to get your mind away from where you are right now, to alleviate that situation, to get away from it for a particular period of time. And once you close the book, you're back in your bed with all those things. Okay? So, in other words, the angle that we're taking at these escapism experiences is what we call, from the psychological point of view, a coping framework. Coping means dealing with a situation, a stressor, that's what psychologists call it, a stressor that you have to deal with that creates a problem of some sort for you. Now, it could be in your work life that your boss has just been mean to you. It could be in the subway that it's crowded and you just don't stand the noise and all the things that are going on around you. It may be that you're at home and your kids are crying and so forth. Okay, so there's all kinds of stresses that we deal with in daily life. So maybe these escapism consumption experiences are ways to escape from a situation or a problem that is challenging you. That's the framework we are taking. We're not saying necessarily all escapism consumption is that type of coping. Okay, please don't get me wrong. I'm just saying some variance in this coping, in the coping motivation, comes from this escape motivation from some problem. Okay? So we're taking this framework to try to explain how does escapism consumption impact your subjective sense of well-being. Okay? And what we find in the literature when it comes to coping, there are different types of coping mechanisms, different ways in which people cope. Two fundamental types of coping exist, and they have some dimensions. One way of coping is you address the problem. You deal with the problem, right? You solve your problem. You address it. The other way of coping is you avoid your problem. Right? What we are saying, escapism experiences fall into the avoidance category. So, if escapism consumption is in a response to a stressor, then it is most likely an avoidance type of dealing. Now, if avoidance is what's going on, then we know from the psychology literature and also some literature in our in our journals, Social Indicator Research, or what was the other one here, Journal of Happiness Studies, okay, we find that avoidance coping reduces subjective well-being, ultimately, and that's sort of the bottom line of these studies, because the problem doesn't go away. At the end of the day, when I wake up, the problem is still there and probably it's worse. Okay, so the more I avoid, the worse I get. Okay? And that's the fundamental starting point of our thinking. So the base hypothesis is, well, escapism consumption experiences, in general, if it's avoidance coping, reduce subjective well-being. And we do have findings like this, for example, in the context of I don't know exactly what it's called, multi-role-playing games. You know, these video games where you take on a role and you're in front of your TV for 12 hours and you're trying to do something, you know, in connection with others, and you know, so in that context, you know, there are studies that find that this escapism type of behavior, this getting into this game with your mind and forgetting everything around you, actually deteriorates the well-being. Right? So that's one example, empirical example that we have to go off of when we look at this. You know, so what is the contribution of looking at this then? Well, first of all, we would like to first of all know, do escapism consumption experiences impact subjective well-being? First of all, we don't have evidence, empirical evidence for this. So first purpose of the study is really to establish that. Okay, what's the linkage? How does it look like? And then also, are there conditions, since we're all thinking positively as we've heard in the plenary session, right? And we should look at the positive sides of well-being and not only avoiding the negatives, right? So we're trying to figure out, are there conditions, okay, that we can affect, in our case as marketers, that actually turn that dial towards something positive. So in other words, can we create escapism consumption experiences that improve subjective well-being? Okay, so that's the purpose of this research. And from a managerial point of view, you know, that's going to help us change the way we design games, change the way we have applications on our cell phones, change the way that we design, for example, movies, and so forth. And all of those escapism kind of consumption experiences, right? So that's the purpose behind all of this. And so what we are saying is that moderator, that moderating condition is in fact the degree to which during the escapism consumption experience, the experience generates what we call here self-enhancing consumption. Okay, let me explain this. Now, if you look at coping, then what we know about coping is that avoidance strategies tend to be chosen more if one faces a big problem rather than a small problem. So the larger the problem becomes, the more likely it is that you choose the avoidance type of coping rather than the problem-solving type of coping. Also, if we look at who chooses the problem-solving kind of coping type of strategy, those are people who have a higher degree of self-efficacy. They feel like they can tackle the problem. So in other words, the idea behind this is to say, okay, you've chosen to avoid your problem, okay, but maybe I can help you to feel more confident about you. about yourself. Maybe I can help you identify solutions in the process that then help you, once you wake up, to address your problem maybe differently. Okay? And those are the concept of self-esteem. So this is where, I put you more in charge of your problems, of your life, of your situation in which you are. And I also strengthen your perception of who you are. Not only do you feel confident, but also you get a better sense of what is right for me and what is not. Okay? These things taken together make up what we call self-enhancing consumption experience. Okay? So at the end of the day then, if the escapism experience can be characterized as self-enhancing, we will hypothesize that subjective well-being actually tends to improve. If we don't have this, if it's sort of a mindless type of exercise that's going on, or experience, then it's not going to help at all. But if in the process we do something that gives us a sense of self, in a sense of self-esteem and self-consistency, then subjective well-being can improve. It doesn't have to, but we think that it will. Okay? So now let's see how we studied this. Now we started with a, since we're marketers, we always go with primary data. So there's, we have to collect our own. We can't draw on large samples somewhere on these concepts because the measurement is very specific and unique. So we do have to collect our data sets. Now, where we collected the data set is through an intercept survey. That means we went into the center of a city, and I'm from France, so this was in France. And we just asked people on the street with a survey about these things. And as a stimulus, we said, think about the last time you used your cell phone. Now, everybody that came here with the subway knows what I'm talking about. Okay, so think about the last time you used your cell phone. Okay, and then please answer the following questions. We ended up with 565 respondents that used it at least once or twice per day. Okay, so we're not looking at those people who use their cell phones intermittently once in a while, not so likely for escapism purposes. Okay, but those that are constantly on the phone. Okay, and the scale, the frequency ranged up to 5, 6, 7 times, and so forth. So what we've used then is a few measures to capture these concepts, and Joe said that it would be probably good to show you how we measured things. So escapism experience, this is the new concept, the new construct. We measured with the following questions here. I forget about my immediate surroundings when I use it. Using it makes me forget where I am. After using it, I feel like I've come back to the real world. This, in essence, measures, did they actually get away, right? And did they get into this mindset that separates them from their surroundings? Subjective well-being here and the rest of the measures are established standard measures. How would you evaluate your life right now? And following questions, you probably know this measure. When it comes to the moderating variable, we have, in essence, 2 dimensions. One is self-esteem, the other one is self-consistency, and we have, in essence, established measures for those as well. I like the way I am when I use it. I feel satisfied with myself. That's self-esteem. Self-consistency, I can identify with using the device. I see myself as a typical user and so forth. Right? So these are questions that show self-consistency with the experience that they've just had. Now, taking this together, the first step typically is, of course, let's look at whether or not we measured things well. And these are the typical indicators for measurement models that you're probably also familiar with, and you can see that these are acceptable for the sample size that we're looking at, and the correlations don't really look odd. We are within the range of the 5-point scales that we applied, so there's no odd things really in the data. Now, using moderated regression analysis or OLS regression, we tested nested models. We started with escape experience on its own, so the main path. And the main path here shows significant negative impact. Okay, so escapism does reduce subjective well-being. Okay, that's one of the insights from the study. Generally, when people use whatever consumption stimulus we're looking at, and it produces this state of flow through escape, it impacts them negatively, systematically. And then we looked at self-enhancing consumption, and that on its own didn't really make a difference. But it made a difference when it was joined in the equation with escapism consumption. So if during the escapism consumption, this consumption was characterized by the respondents as self-enhancing, then we have a significant change in this basic path. Okay? Now it's really hard to visualize these numbers in terms of what does this really mean, in terms of the impact. So I've just decomposed this interaction term to show you how the curve shifts. Okay, so if you have a low self-enhancement condition, there's negative association between subjective well-being and escapism. And this is consistent with the main effect. Now, for low self-enhancement, it's even steeper than the main effect. The main effect is somewhere in the middle here. Okay, but if it is considered high in terms of self-enhancement, this curve actually shifts. Now, in our data, it shifts to marginally positive. But then again, like I said, this study was done for internal validity, not external validity. That means when we look at this curve, depending on depending on what is being consumed, by whom it is consumed, and so forth, so the generalizability means that this will turn. The only thing this says is, yes, there's a difference. This is more positive than this. We don't know how positive it can be at average across all escapism type of consumption experience that they might be. But for cell phone users in France for this city at this time, it looks like this. So in essence, we are establishing that there's a moderation, a change in interaction. What are the implications? Like I try to introduce